I'm Janice Edwards, and now we've been talking about life lessons, and now we turn to the subject of hospice. I have a confession to make. While I've done interviews about hospice in the past, this time it's very personal for me. I have a loved one who is not expected to recover, barring a miracle. So as I'm going through this, I know that many that I know are also grappling with some of the same issues. And that's the reason that I invited Sally Adelus, President and CEO of Hospice of the Valley, to join us today to talk about that when it comes time to have those very difficult discussions. Sally, nice to see you again.
Thank you for inviting me back to the show, Janice. I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate what you do so much. And for people who don't understand exactly what hospice is, could you just give a broad overview first?
I think you just chose the perfect word there about broad overview. Really, hospice is a concept of care. It's not just about medical care. It's about a care of the emotions, of the spirit, our social. So it's really a holistic approach to taking care of somebody towards the end of life, in the last 6 months of life. And that individual may have said, I don't want any more curative treatment. I'm foregoing treatment at this point in time. And the focus and shift of care goes towards comfort and relief of suffering. And I think one of the most unique aspects of hospice is that the family and the loved ones are involved in the care as well.
And I guess making that determination, obviously there's sometimes signs with the body, but I think when a loved one's been ill and you've been fighting for life the whole time, to all of a sudden shift to the hospice mode must take an enormous amount of thought, probably prayer and information. What kinds of questions should someone who's been told it's time to consider hospice ask to really be comfortable with that idea?
It does take an awful lot of energy as well to shift that focus. But some of the questions may be, well, and I also want to say there's a lot of fears associated with asking those questions, those what if questions. And one of them maybe is, how much time do I have? And sometimes that question never ever gets asked. It may not ever get asked by the individual, the patient, or the family. Other questions are surrounding what to expect, what may be coming down through this journey. You know, there's fears associated, will I be in pain? Will I suffer when that final time comes? The fear of being a burden on your family is a very critical fear that many of our patients experience. And there's nothing like going down that road and not having those fears addressed and having the support and comfort of hospice there, being receptive and listening to those questions that are being asked is really important. So many of us can go down through that road, that journey, and not have the support of hospice around them. And I think one of the most statements that we see when we get our family satisfaction surveys is, I wish I'd known about hospice sooner for my loved one.
I've heard that from people who finally were involved with hospice. And I think that whole sense of, if I do this, am I giving up on my loved one? And I have to say, even in this segment, it seems almost selfish to talk about the people who are left behind as opposed to the loved one, but because that's the perspective that many people are dealing with now in this segment. I guess one of the issues to address would be that it's all right to deal with your own feelings, even as you're looking at your loved one who was about to make this transition.
Absolutely. This is uncharted territory for most of us. There's a lot of anxiety, apprehension, anguish about what to expect. And it's okay to say, you know, I'm frightened here. I don't know what to expect. And to start to talk about those exact feelings is really, really important, because the journey can be very, very lonely without that support. And that's what hospice does. It sort of, I look at hospice as a facilitator, a guide, if you will. As we approach our dying, it's a very normal, often natural process. It's like our birth. And we need a guide along the way to show us what to expect, what's normal, that some of these feelings, experiences that we're having are very normal, to validate that sometimes it's okay that you will feel depressed. It's a normal experience. But having the support along the way is really integral about hospice philosophy, about hospice work.
And it also takes you out of denial with that, because sometimes within families, even if a loved one is saying, I feel this time coming, family members will say, oh, don't say that. We don't want to hear that because they're not ready. And then I know that many times people have said that when someone is in that transitory state and maybe not able to verbally communicate, there's still many times a decision as to when they are ready to go, and sometimes they're holding on for the loved ones instead of feeling like they can be released in transition.
Sometimes it's also difficult to know what to say as well, and sometimes loved ones will step back and say just exactly, well, no, let's not talk about that right now. Let's not go, and that's going to make you feel depressed. I think one of the most helpful things that a loved one can say is to validate that person's experience, to say, you know, I'm feeling depressed too at this point in time. When they experience that sort of the first time, I'm feeling scared, I'm feeling anxious about what's happening, I'm worried about you, to just listen and be present and really validate that experience. It's easy to want to recoil and not to talk about it.
Right. And I think it's one of those times where you realize if never before, it's so important to seize those opportunities to communicate, not to hold back, so that things that are unresolved might be resolved during that time as well as having to plan for practical steps beyond, which is a lot to deal with.
I mean, as we travel towards the end of our life, it can be one of the most beautiful, meaningful experiences that, as human beings, that we can experience, both for the individual that's towards their end of life and both for the family and loved ones. We see this in hospice all the time. It's unique to hospice, and there's often a fear about going down through that journey, but it can be literally a reconnection of our human spirits, our relationships. Again, you talk about resolving some of those past issues that have gone before, bringing together families and loved ones in a really meaningful experience.
Yes, I know you've shared a story before about drumming, that one woman wanted drums as she was preparing for her transition, and that just having that love and support and having things the way she wanted it was so important.
Validating the normalcy of what is occurring, absolutely.
Yes. When after that has happened, as a matter of fact, we are here at the West Bay Center, in the Community Center in the Fillmore, where a memorial service was given for a friend of mine known throughout the community, Ave Montague, who passed a while ago. And the grief that then occurs, whether it's been a sudden death, as hers was, or after an illness, I think is another facet that people are not prepared for. How does hospice help those loved ones who will remain deal with that?
Hospice will support those families and those loved ones for after 13 months after the loss of their loved one. That is something that's, again, unique to hospice programs. We offer a variety of support groups, whether it be individual or group support groups. And there's nothing, if you've lost somebody dear and close to you, it's extremely beneficial to be in a room with others that have had a similar experience. Again, it goes to validating your experience, creating this safe, nurturing place where people can disclose their feelings. You know, sometimes as we go through grief, you may have experienced it, I have with the loss of my parents, but you lose concentration, you can't sleep, you're having a multitude of different emotions, up and down, and just to be in the presence of a really supportive environment with others that have experienced and have those feelings validated, and learn and be able to adapt some strategies in how to cope with that, knowing that you can be doing okay for one day and then the next day you're in an environment and it just triggers all those feelings again. Right. Coming up to sort of certain holidays that we all as families and loved ones experience together can be an incredibly difficult time to be dealing with grief, but knowing that it's a process that we all go through, and trying to allow yourself to recognize that and say it's okay to go through this process.
Not judge it in
because
that way.
I think most of what we see in hospice is for individuals and families that don't go through that process, and then sometimes may not go to grief support or may not access some sort of support, whether it's through friends and families, that it's later on in life. They're troubled with not being able to cope with other grief situations that come along, whether it be a loss of a job, a loss of a house. It may not necessarily be a loss of a loved one.
Right, but it's a loss.
That grief has not been processed, that's what can happen. It becomes unresolved grief.
If there's one gift that a loved one could give to someone who's about to make that transition, and you may not know exactly the day, what, if there's one there, I'm sure there were probably several, but can you talk a little bit about what that might be?
What that may be, it may be as simple as 3 words, I love you.
I love you, yes.
And sometimes that can be the hardest and most difficult 3 words to say. A lot of what we deal with as we come towards the end of our life is finding meaning in what's happening to us. So sometimes there are issues before that have gone through that the family and the individual has experienced that has left remorse and guilt and anger. So another 3 words may be about forgiveness as well. So those
are the
words,
2.
I would say, and what hospice does is allow the facilitation of that to occur. Yeah.
Sally, thank you for the work that you do. Thank you for this segment, too, because I hope that it will help many who are dealing with this. And it's helped me, and I thank you for that, too, on a personal note as well. So thanks very much.
Thank you.
And if you'd like to contact Hospice of the Valley, the information is on our screen, also on our website at bayareavista.com.